Welcome to the Ben Wood Johnson podcast. You can visit Dr. Johnson's blog at benwoodpost.com. Dr. Johnson's works can be found at drbenwoodjohnson.com. You can also support Dr. Johnson on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Ben Wood Johnson podcast. Today is May 16th, 2022. This is podcast number 72. Now, I have to admit that it's been a long pause. I didn't anticipate that. I didn't want that pause to be that long, but I was bogged down with certain commitments, and it took longer than I thought. It consumed my time, and at the end of the day, it wasn't worth it. I'll be honest with you. I'll talk about this in another podcast, but I had to take some time to figure out certain things, to understand certain realities, and to make sense of certain things. But anyway, the Ben Wood Johnson podcast is back. Hopefully, it will be back for as long as possible. And those of you who have listened to this podcast on a regular basis, I applaud you and I thank you for that. And those of you who are new, well, please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. Please join me on other platforms, including Twitter, Patreon, and whatnot. The opportunity is to be able to share thoughts and ideas about certain issues. Today, we're going to be talking about the concept of natural crime. And the idea is that whenever we're talking about crime, what we are talking about is the naturality of the conduct, and how, from a philosophical standpoint, being conceived, perceived, and understood as a criminal can be a detriment to the personhood of the individual. In other words, criminality is the antithesis of humanity. Okay, so it is important to understand how that could affect a person's humanity, humanhood in the end. So without further ado, let us delve right into it. Let us say that you are a young man in your teen years, and you live in a community where there's a lot of chaos. And by that I mean you live in a community where the environment is conducive to people engaging in a conduct which could be construed as criminal. Let us say that you live downtown or near it. In this area, there's not a lot of police presence, and the members of the community have sort of left to fend for themselves. And certain individuals within that community have taken over the community, and they have sort of created an atmosphere of disorder. They have created an atmosphere of lawlessness. And you, as a young man living in that community, having to defend yourself from sort of certain elements of that community, you have engaged, or at least you have faced a situation where you felt the need to engage in a conduct which could be construed as criminal. Then the question becomes, could we consider you a delinquent? Could we say that you are a criminal? Well, let's go back to the concept of criminality. What is criminality in its most intrinsic sense? What is a crime in the most fundamental sense? In previous podcasts, I have talked about crime to the extent that it is defined from certain perspectives, to the extent that it is understood from particular lenses, from particular prisms. I have talked about crime in terms of its natural underpinnings, But the question remains the same. That is, what is crime to the extent that the individual is likely to engage in it? Is crime an individual flaw, or is crime a collective flaw? In other words, what breeds crime? What breeds criminality? Is the individual likely to engage in the criminal conduct by himself, or should there be stimuli within the environment which would sort of induce the individual to engage in a certain conduct? In other words, is criminality the product of the collective society, or is criminality the product of the individual inherent malice? Now, these are interesting questions which I'm not sure that I could answer in little monologue we're having here. Nonetheless, it is fundamental that we understand the nature of crime. Criminality, in its most fundamental sense, is not an individual thing. Criminality, in its most fundamental, if not in the most basic sense, is a societal problem. Crime exists so long as there is a society in which a group of individuals defines individual conduct in this way or in that manner. In other words, there ought to be an environment in which an agglomeration or a group of people are sort of congregated. There ought to be a certain definition of a conduct or certain behaviors in which the collective describes a conduct as being this way or that way. So the criminality in and of itself has to be construed at the collective level before it can become an individual thing. And by that understanding, criminality is not an individual problem, an individual inherency. It is a collective inherency. It is part of the collective. So long as society exists, there will be crime because there are certain conduct that are natural at their core, but those conducts will not be allowed in a society. For example, if we're talking about theft, no society tolerates theft in any way, shape, or form. It is always unacceptable to take other people's property. Okay? However, there are certain contexts where theft is not defined as such. There are a certain way of engaging in the theft that will not be described as such. Therefore, the society decides what is determining which conduct is to be described as theft and which is not, or which conduct is punishable under the rules or the laws that they have set forth and which are not, or which are going to be overlooked, which are going to be excusable, which are going to be accepted whether tacitly or actively or expressly. Whenever we're talking about crime, we have to understand the foundation of any conduct which could be construed as criminal has to come from the society, the social milieu itself. Now, we have to look at the punishment, or at least what could happen to someone who engages in a conduct that is defined as such. In most societies, we have what is called law and order, okay? And the concept of law and order, it's a sort of a mechanism that makes it possible to punish individuals for a conduct that is deemed either wrong, unacceptable, or immoral, or criminal. Okay? And the mechanism of the law and order mechanism establishes the parameters in which people are expected to behave or expected to be themselves. And usually these parameters makes it almost impossible for the individual to be himself, because almost every facet of your natural tendency or natural tendencies is to behave a certain way. And that way may not be compatible with what the collective is willing to tolerate or accept from you in particular. If you were to engage in a conduct that is deemed unacceptable, then you might be deemed a criminal, or at least you might have to face the wrath of whatever legal, at least law and order system that is in existence within your community. And it's usually a criminal justice system, which is based on a court system. There's a law enforcement, there's a lawmaking mechanism. So you have all these three entities working together that are going to punish the individual when the individual engages in a conduct that is deemed unacceptable and thereby criminal. Okay? Now, those entities, that is this mechanism, if you will, is likely to cast value judgments on the individual himself. And those value judgments, in the beginning, is the idea that this individual is criminal. And the criminality, the way it is understood in most societies, modern societies, it is that it is a wrong. When a person is deemed to be criminal, that individual is also deemed to be a wrong, or perhaps someone who is immoral, someone who is unworthy. And the consequences of being deemed that way could be loss of freedom and even loss of life. You could be fined and all sorts of things could happen, and as a retribution for the conduct, so-called, that the person or the individual perpetrated. Okay? So in doing so, the individual becomes intertwined with the conduct which is described or designed or construed to be wrong. So criminality becomes a substitute for humanity. At least it becomes a justification for the loss of humanity. If a person is described, designed, or found to be a criminal, the perception is, the understanding is that that individual no longer deserves to be seen and treated as a human being. Therefore, all the amenities that come with being a human being dissipate at that point, and the individual becomes known as a criminal. It's a substitute for the humanity of the person, and being known as a criminal justifies certain treatments in which the individual is going to be subjected in the society in which he evolves. And those treatments are going to design to undermine not only the humanity of the individual, but also the individual in his most intrinsic self. So the individual is going to become this thing, this entity, short from being a human being, that is designed or described to be a certain way. If you are deemed to be a criminal, you have automatically lost every right that you somehow had earned over the years in the society. Of course, most societies talks about inalienable rights. It's complete nonsense, because if we're going to talk about inalienable rights, there are certain rights that should never be relinquished under any circumstance, whether you committed a crime or not. Yet, but those societies also consider certain conduct as a rational or as a justification for dehumanize another person. Okay? So once you have been deemed a criminal, you have also been deemed a non-human. At least you have been retrograded to something other than a person. You have lost your right to exist, your right to freedom, your right to sort of be yourself. And that dichotomy over time, at least that reality over time, have become the sort of the template for this defining humanity, and it usually applies to the individual, although it does apply sometimes to communities. So you have understanding that a certain community is entire, the whole community is rotten, to the extent that we have to get rid of that community, or the people of that community, they're criminals, they're thugs, they're whatnot. Okay, and it also applies to countries, right? So you have certain individuals who have sort of tagged a particular country as being the sort of renegade breed of individuals that have, like, the community as a whole is worthless, to the extent that we have to sort of show them, teach them democracy, teach them civility, teach them how to be human beings. But it is all based on the rationale that crime in and of itself is inherent in the person, and therefore anybody who thereby commits a crime is also a person who doesn't deserve to be seen or considered a human being. He's a savage, to put it this way. And the foundation has sort of caused enormous harms to humanity. And as I alluded in the beginning, it undermines the person, because the idea that human beings can be inherently bad persons, it undermines the humanity of the individual. It bestializes the person. It turns him into a beast, a savage being that is sort of not worthy of anything but whatever other beings decide that he's worth. So it undermines the humanity of the person. Okay. So the foundation of that understanding, to say it again, is on this misconstrued notions that the individual is immoral. There's something in the individual that is wrong, that is not right. But crime should not be understood that way. The individual should never be understood in this regard, because the individual is not innately, intrinsically wrong. The individual is not innately or intrinsically bad. Whenever he engages in the conduct, whether that conduct could be construed as either good or bad, has nothing to do in the inherent capacity of the person to be. Once a person is a person, in other words, once you are born as a human being, your naturality will always supersede whatever society expects from you. And you will compete with your naturality. And your naturality, your nature, if you put it this way, is to be yourself, is to be a certain way, is to respond to the demands, to the economy of the natural milieu. You as a person could not be other than what your nature made you. Nature does not create bad individuals, because nature does not know such a thing. There is no such a thing in the natural. Criminality does not exist in the natural. Everybody was born to be. Everything that exists in nature was designed to be the way that it is. The concept that certain things in nature are either bad or good, or misconstrued understandings that human beings have sort of come up with over time because of their incapacity to understand themselves in the natural. And deciding to live in a society does not make it better to sort of undermine the nature of another being on the basis that that being is worthless. Every human being is worthy. Every human being must be free, must enjoy his nature, must be as his nature intended him to be. And this is the foundation of being in this world. Crime, the concept of crime, undermines humanity at its core. It takes away the beingness of the person, thereby making him or turning him into the nothingness. And the person loses all credibility in his nature. Everything he does is based on understandings about who he is, about his intentions, his desire to harm others, when in fact this is never the case. Every human being was designed to be. And the way the person is inconsequential to the way others would like him to be. If I live in an environment where the conditions are there for me to behave a certain way, me behaving that way does not say anything about my personhood, does not say anything about my naturality, about my tendency to be either right or wrong, good or bad, righteous or evil. All it does is it tells about my story as a person. It tells you that I was designed to be this way, I was designed to be that way. And according to the circumstances I face, I am being the way I was designed to be. Certainly some individuals are likely to contain themselves under certain situations, but others cannot. Or at least they struggle to do it. No amount of law, no societal mechanism, no concept will stop the person from being the person. No law enforcement will stop an individual from being himself. So long as the person lives in a community, the person will behave in a way that someone else might just deem unacceptable or even criminal. Punishing a person who breaks the law will only make it easier for him to lose his humanity. It is dangerous to treat a person as anything but a human being, and the concept of criminality makes it easy for human beings to devalue themselves, for humanity to dehumanize themselves. The concept of crime is a curse for the man. The concept of crime is a curse for humanity. No man was supposed to be considered unworthy of being a man. No human being was designed to be unworthy of being treated like a human being. Whenever you corner a man and you call him a criminal, you are also turning him into the nothingness. And this is unacceptable.